young seamstress adopted twin babies. Years later, their real father came back as a CEO millionaire. Snow blanketed the quiet town of Rose Hill like a heavy quilt. Wind howled softly through the narrow alleys, stirring powder off rooftops. Inside Thread of Grace, a small sewing shop glowing with golden lamplight, Sandra Whitlow swept the last bits of thread from the floor. At 24, Sandra lived alone above her shop. Her platinum blonde hair, softly curled, was pulled back with a velvet ribbon. Her hands were calloused from hours of needlework, her eyes tired but gentle. She reached to switch off the final lamp when a faint sound cut through the wind. A cry she stilled, then came another. She stepped to the back door and opened it slowly. The cold struck her instantly. Snow swirled in the alley, silent and white, except for the soft, panicked cries coming from near the stacked firewood. Sandra's heart thudded. She stepped outside, boots crunching over ice. There, half buried in snow, sat a basket lined with deep purple velvet. Inside, two newborn girls. They were wrapped tightly in matching blankets. Tiny pink dresses made of soft lamb's wool peeked out. Their faces were red from crying, fists clenched, mouths open in protest. Sandra gasped and dropped to her knees. Each baby wore a small silver necklace, identical pendants, a single falling leaf. Beneath them, tucked into the blank, it was a torn photograph. Only half of a smiling woman's face remained. No note, no names, no explanation. Sandra looked around. The alley was empty. No footsteps, no voices, only the sound of her own breath and two fragile lives crying in the snow. Her hands trembled. She should call someone, report it, do what anyone would do, but she could not move. One baby whimpered, the other reached out blindly, and her tiny fingers wrapped around Sandra's thumb. A sob escaped her. The feeling was immediate, overwhelming, and terrifying. A pull deep in her chest like something had been sewn into her heart in an instant. She gently gathered both babies into her arms. They were warm, impossibly small, and heartbreakingly real. Sandra stood in the snow, blinking back tears. The world had always been quiet for her, but this silence felt sacred. She looked up to the gray sky. From now on, she whispered, voice shaking, I will be the thread that keeps you together. And with two babies pressed against her chest, Sandra stepped back inside, the door closing softly behind her as snow continued to fall. It took weeks of paperwork, phone calls, and silent prayers before it became official. Sandra Whitlow was now the legal guardian of the two girls found in the snow. No one came forward. No family, no claims, just silence. She named them Aria and Ella. Aria, the older by minutes, was delicate, dreamy, and always holding a crayon in her tiny hand. She hummed while she drew, often on the back of old receipts or fabric scraps Sandra left lying around. Lyra was different, curious, bold, and bursting with questions. She climbed onto chairs, peeked into cabinets, and once tried to hand-stitch a sock when she was 2. Sandra sewed each dress by hand, soft and simple, adding little ruffles or bows as they grew. She kept every outgrown piece folded in a wooden chest like pages in a storybook only she could read. 4 years passed in quiet, messy, beautiful rhythm. Mornings began with cereal spills and giggles. Days were filled with fabric, chalk dust, lullabibis, and tangled thread. Sandra worked late into the night, pinning patterns and hemming sleeves, sometimes with Ella snoring on a pillow beside her, or Aria curled up in a corner with a picture book. She barely made enough, but the girls never knew lack, only warmth. Sandra learned to live with tired eyes and full arms. She learned the names of Aria's favorite colors, and how Ella liked her apples peeled but not too skinny. She memorized the scent of their hair after bath time. She kissed bruised knees, wiped away bad dreams, and taught them how to sew a button. In every way that mattered, they were hers. And yet some nights when the house was dark and the only light came from the tiny lamp above the sewing table, Sandra would take out the old photograph and 2 silver necklaces from the tin box. Beneath her bed, the falling leaf pendant still glimmered faintly, untouched. The torn photo still held the same woman's smile, but no name, no clue. The mystery remained a knot she had never been able to untie. She told herself it did not matter, but sometimes Arya would ask questions in her soft, careful voice. One afternoon, while drawing in the corner with Lyra, Arya looked up and said, "Mommy, where's our daddy?" Sandra froze. She looked at Arya, those eyes wide and wondering, so full of trust. I don't know, sweetheart," she whispered, kneeling down to stroke Arya's cheek. "But you have me, you'll always have me." Arya nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Sandra smiled through the tightness in her chest, kissed the top of her daughter's head, and whispered the words she always came back to when the world didn't make sense. "We're stitched together, my loves, and I'm not letting go." The community center shimmered with soft lights, white tablecloths, and the hum of polite conversation. It was the annual Winter Hope Gala, a charity event supporting children in foster care. Sandra had been invited last minute to assist with custom suit fittings for high-profile guests. She rarely left her small town, much less for events like this, but someone had recommended her work, and the organizers needed a local tailor. She accepted, partly for exposure, mostly because she could not afford to say no. She brought Arya and Lyra with her, not wanting to leave them behind. The twins wore matching pink princess dresses, each handmade with tulle skirts and embroidered hems. Their blonde hair was tied up in tiny twin buns, and in their hands they each clutched a Ziploc bag of heart-shaped cookies Sandra had baked that morning. They stayed close to her side as she adjusted lapels and pinned sleeves. The girls whispered to each other in their secret twin language, occasionally offering cookies to the tuxedoed guests who passed by. Everyone smiled. The twins lit up the room like sunlight against a gray wall. Across the ballroom, Illy Ashbourne stood near the stage. The 36-year-old CEO of Ashbourne Biolabs was known for his sharp intellect, private life, and relentless philanthropy. Tonight, he was the event's lead sponsor, delivering a short speech and posing for a few photos before disappearing, as he often did. He had just taken a sip of champagne when he saw them, 2 little girls in pink dresses, blonde, about 4. Their faces, especially the eyes, pierced straight through him. His heart stopped, his vision blurred. They looked just like Isla. His late wife had worn that exact same expression when she was deep in thought. One child clutching her, drawing close to her chest, the other twirling on her toes, and the necklaces, the silver chains glittered faintly under the lights. No, it could not be, but it was. He would know that leaf pendant anywhere. It was an heirloom from the Ashbourne family, custom made for Isla before the twins were born. Only 2 had ever been created, 1 for each child. His legs moved before his mind caught up. He crossed the room, each step weighed down with disbelief. He stopped just in front of the girls, crouching to meet their eyes. Lyra looked up first. "Hi," she said boldly. Her shoelace was undone. Illy knelt, fingers trembling slightly, and reached to tie it. As he bent down, her tiny hand brushed against his. Then came the sentence that fractured something deep inside him. "You smell like my bedtime pillow," Lyra said casually. The pink one. Illy froze. He looked up slowly into the girl's eyes. They were Ella's eyes, his eyes. Everything inside him twisted. Pain, hope, disbelief, longing. Arya stepped back slightly, clutching her cookie bag. Sandra had just turned from her client, noticing the man kneeling by her daughters. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping forward with a polite smile. "Are they in your way?" Illy stood slowly, brushing his hands on his suit pants. He forced himself to look composed. "No, not at all," he said, voice lower than usual. "They're lovely." Are they yours? Sandra nodded. Yes, they're my daughters. Twins, he asked, though he already knew. Yes. Her eyes were kind but cautious. He smiled softly. They remind me of someone I used to know. There was a silence, just a breath too long. Then Sandra gently called the girls back to her side. Illy watched as they skipped toward their mother, dresses swaying, curls bouncing, giggling in unison. The silver necklaces sparkled under the chandelier. He stood still, the ballroom noise fading behind him, because in that moment he knew they were not just strangers in pink dresses. They were his. Illy had not slept since the gala. He sat in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the lights of the city, unable to shake the image of those two little girls, their golden hair, their silver necklaces, their eyes. Arable and Lyra, no, he had buried them, he had mourned them, he had accepted their absence like a wound that would never stop bleeding, and yet something inside him, something deeper than logic or grief, whispered, they are alive. He scoured the event photos online until he found what he needed, a candid shot of the crowd. In the corner of the frame, just visible, was a storefront sign, Thread of Grace, below it, the name Sandra Whitlow. 2 hours later, Illy was behind the wheel of his car, driving through slush and fog into the Oregon countryside. His heart pounded the entire way. The town was small, quiet, the kind of place where time moved slower. He found the shop nestled between a flower store and a diner, quaint with ivy creeping up one side and pastel curtains in the windows. Late afternoon, mist drifted through the street as he stepped out of his car. Inside the shop, Sandra was sweeping. The little bell above the door had not chimed yet. She paused. There was a knock at the door, slow, even, not rushed. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front. Aria and Lyra, dressed in their usual pink dresses, were sitting on the floor playing with fabric swatches. At the sound, they perked up and followed behind her, giggling. Sandra opened the door and froze. Illy stood there, tall in a charcoal coat, holding his hat in one hand. His eyes, rimmed with fatigue, softened the moment he saw the three of them together. Aria blinked. Mommy, it's the vest man. Lyra squinted, then grinned. He looks like he came from a fairy tale. Sandra's brows drew together. Mr. Ashbourne, how did you? I'm sorry. Illy said gently, I hope I'm not intruding. I need a suit tailored for an upcoming conference, and you were the first person I thought of. She hesitated. Then, out of politeness or curiosity, she stepped aside. Come in. The shop was warm and inviting, its shelves lined with ribbons, bolts of fabric, and finished dresses hanging neatly on the wall. There were sketches pinned near the window, and a child's crayon drawing of a princess taped beside them. Illy stepped inside, his gaze scanning the space, then resting on the twins. They sat down beside him without hesitation. Lyra grabbed a piece of paper and scribbled a purple blot. With legs, she held it up. This is you, she said proudly, in Mommy's wedding dress. Sandra gasped and laughed, flustered. Lyra, but Illy chuckled, placing a hand over his chest. If wearing a wedding dress gets me 2 princesses like you, I'll take it. Sandra knelt beside him and began taking measurements, her fingers brushing his sleeve. She noticed how his gaze lingered not on her, but on the girls. It was not admiration, it was not amusement. It was grief and longing, and something painfully close to recognition. Elare, yawning, climbed into Illy's lap without a word. She leaned against his chest and fell asleep. He did not move. He looked down at the small bundle of warmth and trust cradled against him like a fragile treasure. His arms wrapped around her slowly, reverently. His throat worked as he fought back tears. Later that night, after he had gone, Sandra moved quietly through the apartment above the shop. The twins were asleep. She unlocked the drawer of an old cabinet and pulled out the photograph she had kept hidden for 4 years. For the first time, she looked closely at the torn image, the missing half. Her heart stopped. It was him. She opened her laptop, fingers trembling, and typed in a search, Ashbourne family fire twins, News articles flooded the screen. Headlines about a biotech mogul, a house fire, a tragedy. It was all there. But one thing didn't make sense. If he is their father, why were they left alone? And why hasn't anyone come looking for them? She stared at the photo in her hand, 2 babies swaddled in purple velvet, and she whispered to herself. Unsure if it was fear or fate, she felt rising in her chest. What have I brought into our lives? At first, Sandra tried to brush it off, the muddy footprints on the porch. Large, deep, leading up to the door and disappearing just as suddenly. Could have been from a passer-by. Maybe a delivery person, maybe a prank, but something about them felt watched. Then came the shadow behind her in the grocery store parking lot. Heavy steps too close. She turned fast. Nothing. Just the sound of a cart rattling in the wind. A chill ran up her spine. She gripped the girl's hands tighter as they walked to the car. In the evenings, she checked the locks, made sure the curtains were drawn tight. Yet the feeling lingered like a draft from a crack she couldn't find. Then came the night of the storm. The rain pattered softly on the windows as Sandra stitched quietly under a warm lamp glow. Arya and Lyra were upstairs, tucked in after a dinner of tomato soup and grilled cheese. The sewing machine hummed beneath her hands. Then shatter, a piercing crack of glass exploding echoed through the room. Sandra jerked up, heart racing. A brick lay near her feet, surrounded by shards of her display window. She ran outside, grabbing the closest thing. A fabric shears from the table, but whoever it was had already fled into the night. Her breath caught as her eyes landed on the wall beside the shop door, spray painted in red. Don't dig up the past. She stood frozen, soaked in rain, panting. Then she ran back inside and raced upstairs, where Arya and Ellery were crying from their beds. She gathered them in her arms. It's okay, I've got you. She whispered over and over, even as her own hands shook. The next morning, Illy showed up. He didn't knock. He stormed in the moment the open sign flipped, face pale with restrained fury. He had read about the attack in a tabloid blog. Gossip sites already speculating about the mysterious incident at the seamstress's shop. Sandra was sweeping glass from the floor, her palm bandaged with a napkin. Blood had soaked through. What happened? Illy's voice was low, strained. I'm fine, she said automatically, brushing past him, but Illy grabbed her wrist gently. You're bleeding. He knelt, took out a handkerchief from his coat, and began wrapping her hand with slow, careful precision. His fingers trembled. You need security, he said. Now I can't afford. I can. Sandra opened her mouth to protest again, but the look in his eyes stopped her. That night, a black SUV with tinted windows parked discreetly across the street. 2 trained security guards took shifts watching the perimeter. Arya and Ellery waved to them from the window, thinking it was all a game. Illy didn't leave either. He slept in his car outside the shop, one eye always open. And inside the home, something shifted. He became part of their rhythm. Arya asked if he could help braid her hair one morning, and though he fumbled, she giggled through the whole thing. Lyra taught him how to make pancakes shaped like bears. Sandra watched it all unfold from the corner of the room, a growing ache in her chest. There was no pretending in the way Illy looked at them. No pretending in the way he lifted Lyra when she stumbled, or the way he hummed a lullaby that Arya said felt like something from a dream. No man could fake that kind of love, and Sandra was running out of reasons to ignore the truth. One night, when the girls were asleep and the sewing machine finally quieted, Sandra poured 2 cups of chamomile tea and sat across from Illy in the small workroom. No more hiding. Illy stared into his cup. Then he spoke. She died 2 months after giving birth. Isla, Sandra didn't interrupt. I was barely holding on. He continued. The girls were all I had left, then the fire. They said it was faulty wiring. The nursery caught first. He paused. I buried 2 empty coffins, he whispered, because there wasn't enough to find. Sandra's breath caught. He looked up, his eyes raw. I stopped living that day. I just kept breathing until I saw them in this shop. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small laminated photograph, the one she had hidden all these years. She handed it to him silently. Illy stared at the torn image, his own smiling face, Isla beside him, her belly swollen with life. He turned it over. Faded ink bled through the paper. For the one who finds them, his throat tightened. Sandra's voice cracked as she said, I think they were meant to find you again, but maybe they were meant to find me too. He didn't speak, but in that moment, something in the air softened like a thread that had been tangled too long, finally beginning to unwind. The truth had teeth, and now it was finally biting back. After the DNA tests confirmed what Illy already felt in his bones, that Arya and Lyra were his daughters, he could no longer sit still. It wasn't enough to have them back in his life. He needed answers. He needed justice. The questions that haunted him for 4 years screamed louder now. How had his daughter survived a fire that left nothing behind? Who orchestrated it? And why? The deeper he dug, the more a single name surfaced over and over. Vincent Marrow. Once Illy's trusted second in command, Vincent had been brilliant, charming, and ambitious. But ambition had curdled into greed. When Illy discovered Vincent had sold confidential research to a competitor, he fired him on the spot. Vincent vanished without a word, but apparently not without a plan. It all fit together now. The fire had happened just weeks after Issa's funeral, when Illy was barely functioning. Vincent had waited until he was at his weakest, his world unraveling, the perfect time to strike. Through quiet contacts, Illy confirmed what he feared. Vincent had paid off the private security at his estate. Surveillance footage from that week had been mysteriously wiped, and the nursery, supposedly destroyed by electrical failure, had been recently rewired by a contractor linked to Vincent's shell company. Then came the biggest breakthrough. Sandra remembered an elderly neighbor who once mentioned having a video doorbell before the fire. They visited him together. The man, Mr. Langley, now used a newer model, but when Illy explained the situation, the man rummaged through his drawer and pulled out an old, dusty flip phone. It never worked after the storm, he muttered, but I think I backed up something weird on it. They brought the phone to a tech shop, held their breath for 2 days, and finally the video emerged. The image was grainy, flickering, but unmistakable. A tall man in a dark overcoat approached the Ashbourne gate late at night. He glanced around nervously, then entered using a key. He returned 10 minutes later with something bundled in a blanket. And again the next night, his face briefly turned toward the camera, a crooked smile, eyes too familiar. Vincent Marrow. It was dated just 3 days before the fire. Illy stood frozen, watching the footage again and again. His hands curled into fists at his sides. He took them, Illy murmured. He took my daughters, and he let me believe they were dead. The pain in his voice was raw, deeper than anything Sandra had heard from him. She reached out, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. Then take it back, she said quietly, all of it, not with anger, with justice. Illy nodded slowly, eyes still on the screen. Justice, he repeated. For them, for Isla, for you, because now it wasn't just about what was stolen. It was about what could finally be reclaimed. The storm had a name now, and Illy was ready to face it. Just days after uncovering the damning footage of Vincent, Illy and Sandra filed an official lawsuit against him. The charges were serious: child abduction, staging a false crime scene, intimidation of a witness, destruction of property, and emotional damages. The case shook the city. Headlines flared. Twins thought dead, found alive. CEO former associate under fire. Ashbourne family secrets resurface in stunning legal battle. The media could not get enough of the Ashbourne tragedy. unraveling in real time. But Illy wasn't interested in spectacle. He wanted truth and closure. At a press conference held just outside the courthouse, Illy stood before the cameras in a simple dark suit. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of 4 years of silence. My daughters were stolen from me. My wife was barely cold in the ground when someone I trusted took what little I had left, and for years I believed they were gone forever. He paused, voice wavering only slightly, but someone found them, someone who didn't have to care but did. A woman with no wealth, no obligation, and no reason to believe anything good would come of it. Chose love anyway. He held up a folded letter. This is from her. Sandra Whitlow. The courtroom fell silent as Illy's attorney unfolded the page and read aloud. I did not give birth to them, but from the moment I held them, wrapped in velvet and crying in the snow, they became flesh of my flesh. I sewed every dress they wore. I stayed up every night they were sick. I've heard them laugh and cry and call me mama with all the faith a child has. That is real, and if love makes a parent, then I am theirs too. Across town, Sandra sat in the back of her quiet home, watching the broadcast alone. Her hands trembled as her words filled the room. She hadn't meant for the world to hear her heart, but she was glad they did. In court, more pieces of the truth came forward. Miriam Brooks, a retired nurse who had once cared for Ella Ashbourne, stepped onto the witness stand. Her voice cracked as she admitted everything. How Vincent had approached her under the guise of an emergency. How she'd handed over the girls, thinking it was for their safety. How he'd threatened her to keep quiet. I didn't know, she whispered, what he would do with them. I didn't know he'd leave them. The final blow came from 2 tiny voices. Aria and Lyra appeared via pre-recorded video from their bedroom, smiling nervously in matching pink dresses. Their hands clutched each other tightly. We don't want to go anywhere, Aria said. Mommy loves us, Lyra added. Daddy loves us now, too, Aria nodded. We want to stay with Mommy and Daddy. That moment cracked even the hardest hearts in the courtroom. The verdict wasn't long in coming. Vincent was officially indicted. Bail was denied. He left the courtroom in handcuffs, face pale, and defeated. But the real moment of reckoning happened later that evening. Sandra was locking up the shop when she noticed something sitting on her sewing table. A wooden box tied with twine. A small note lay beside it in Illy's handwriting, for the woman who stitched a broken world back together. Inside the box was the old sewing machine her late mother once used, the one that had been rusting in the attic long beyond repair. Except now it gleamed like new. Its gears had been oiled, the metal polished. But it wasn't just the machine that made her breath catch. Fixed to the front was a small brass nameplate. Ellison Ashbourne Atelier, where love begins, 1 stitch at a time. Sandra stared at it, heart pounding. Her hands covered her mouth as tears spilled freely. Illy had brought her past and present together in a single act of quiet devotion. He stepped forward from the doorway, unsure. She didn't hesitate. Sandra walked straight into his arms, wrapped around him like she had always known that was where she belonged. This wasn't the end of their fight, but it was the beginning of a family finally being made whole. A year had passed. The sign above the little sewing shop now read, Sandra and Daughters. Below it, in delicate script, the original name remained. Thread of Grace, a quiet reminder of the night everything changed. Inside, soft laughter echoed through the cozy space. Every Saturday, the shop opened its doors to a small sewing class just for girls from the local orphanage. Little hands learned to stitch hems and buttons to mend what was broken, just as Sandra once had, not with fabric, but with love. Today, however, the classroom was a garden, Pink streamers danced in the breeze. A long wooden table was covered in strawberry cupcakes, paper crowns, and juice boxes. And right in the center stood a cake shaped like an old sewing machine, piped in soft pastels and topped with two tiny edible dolls. Aria and Lyra, now 5, twirled in matching blush dresses dotted with embroidered flowers. Their cheeks were dusted with frosting, their eyes glowing with joy. "Make a wish," Sandra called gently, clapping along with the guests. The girls squeezed their eyes shut. Twin candles flickered. 2 wishes were made. Later, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, and the last guests trickled away, Sandra knelt by a table, stacking used plates and folding napkins. She was humming without realizing it. Behind her, footsteps approached. "Mommy." She turned. Aria and Lyra stood there, each holding one of Illy's hands. The twins were still barefoot, grass clinging to their feet, crowns slightly askew, but their grins were impossibly bright. Aria stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. She placed it in Sandra's hand. Lyra leaned close, whispering loudly. "Daddy said, you're the thread that kept him from falling apart." Sandra's heart caught in her chest. She slowly opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, delicate, with a tiny stone set in the center. But what made her eyes brim with tears was the engraving inside the band stitched by Grace. When she looked up, Illy was already kneeling before her. "I don't have a big speech," he said softly. "Just this. You've held all 3 of us together from the moment you didn't have to. And if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life stitching every day with you." Sandra couldn't speak. She nodded, biting her lip, and the girls squealed in delight, hugging her legs. Illy stood, wrapping them all in his arms. They didn't need fanfare. This was a family. Later that night, when the garden was quiet and the twins were asleep upstairs, Illy brought Sandra a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, worn, carefully taped down the middle. The image was whole now. Isla smiled from one side, holding 2 swaddled infants. On the other, Illy stood beside her, eyes younger, filled with hope. Together, they were the family that once was. Sandra turned it over. Faint handwriting bled through the back, just legible. "For the one who finds them, please love them like we do. Isla Ashburn." Sandra's breath shook as she traced the words. She placed the photograph inside a delicate silver frame and set it near her sewing machine, the first one Illy had restored for her. Just below it sat a tiny pair of pink baby shoes, the very first thing she ever stitched for the girls back when they were nameless strangers in a snowy night. As the evening faded, the final image was quiet and simple. The 4 of them sat together on the porch steps. Aria leaned against Lyra, both giggling softly about some secret only they understood. Illy's arm rested around Sandra's shoulders, his hand gently brushing hers. The stars came out, and for the first time in years, there was no storm, no fear, no aching silence, just peace, just family stitched at last by love. Thank you for joining us on this deeply emotional journey of love, loss, and rediscovery. Young seamstress adopted twin babies. Years later, their real father came back as a CEO millionaire is a story that reminds us sometimes family isn't just about blood. It's about the ones who choose to stay, love, and heal. If this story touched your heart the way it did ours, don't forget to hit that hype button and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more unforgettable tales that stir the soul and warm the heart. And hey, don't keep the feels to yourself. Share this video with someone who believes in second chances and the magic of chosen family. We'll see you in the next story. Stay kind, stay human, stay stirred.